Okay, are we ready?
Sure.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. This session is being recorded, so we have to be cognizant of that. We do have some dial-in people. We've got Donna on the phone right now, and so I'm sure some others will be joining us in just a few moments because it's just now the top of the hour. So thank you again for coming today. It's exciting to be here. This is our second Community Scholars for the year. We being the administrative team, made a deliberate decision to bring Tim and Adam over to do a update for State of the Science for online learning and course building and all those neat curriculum things, because we've got this big project ahead of us of bringing a new curriculum to life. So we thought we would bring the experts to you. And so we now have Adam, who is in his doctoral program at University of Central Michigan, doing a doctoral in
educational technology. Online learning.
It's really online learning.
Yeah. Well, I gave it a great title. And then we have our own superstar, Tim Wood, who has done a lot through faculty development across all of the campuses to get us brought up to speed and brought new ideas and fresh ideas. So I'm going to turn it over to them. We do have handouts for everyone. If you don't have a handout, please let us know. And then Tim will have to be leaving earlier to go to another meeting after this. So Adam will wrap us up. And
Thank you.
You're more welcome, sir.
So yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I love coming to talk to nursing. I love all you guys. It was funny because Marcy was like, "This is the one thing we didn't have to register for." So that's your bonus, your free gift with purchase. Our other free gift with purchase is your handout. So this is integral to the presentation today, because what we've done is there are so many rubrics that exist out there on what constitutes good online learning, especially. So when College of Graduate Nursing back in the late 90s made the push to go online, the only thing that existed at that point in time was the Sloan Online Consortium. Does anybody remember that? Sloan Online Consortium has now morphed into the OLC, the Online Learning Consortium. So if you flip to your very last page in the handout, you're going to see that what we've done is we've looked at a bunch of different rubrics. OLC they've been around the longest. They have quite a history of doing it, but then there's also Quality Matters, which is also kind of a sister organization, but not really. It kind of keeps them on their toes. And we belong to both of these. So Adam has been doing a lot of research into these, obviously, with the degree that he's pursuing at this point in time. And it's been really kind of fun because he came to work for us like 3 years ago, and I was just finishing my doctorate. So now I'm done, and now he's just starting his doctorate. So we get to talk about a lot of stuff back and forth, which is really fun and interesting. And you guys get to benefit because of the fact that we are knee deep in this stuff all the time. So what we wound up doing, as opposed to just one presentation, we wound up going, and I've got the 5 different rubrics that are up here. So we've got Quality Matters is one of them. There are 3 different rubrics from Online Learning Consortium that they call the suite, the Online Learning Suite. And then there's this last one called the CARE, Quality Assurance Review System. And this one kind of happens to be my favorite at this point. And tell us how you got a hold of this one. This one, we've sent the PDFs to Rod, so those are all there. We didn't want to just waste paper and print them out. Rod has electronic copies for all of you to be pushed out later so that you have access to this stuff. But tell them about the CARE one.
So this is from the Johns Hopkins School of Business, and I saw a presentation that they did about creating this rubric. And what they did was look at the Quality Matters rubrics and the OLC rubrics and some other ones and kind of compose their own from that. So they did a presentation on it, and I convinced one of them to send me the PDF. That's how I got it.
That was very
So don't post it, I think, publicly. But it's a good one, yeah.
So what we wound up doing is we went through all these different 5 rubrics, and we pulled out the bits and pieces that applied to what we thought were the key considerations for online learning. And as you can see, these were the key topic areas that we came down to. So I'm going to be here for course design, student engagement, instructor presence, and UDL. And course design is actually a behemoth. Course design has many. It's got about 6 or 7 subtopic areas under there. At that point in time, I have to run and go teach my class because I still teach. So I'm going to be going to do my 2-hour lecture from 10 to 12 for health promotion, disease prevention. But anyway, so you've got these topic areas, and follow along. If you drop down to number 1, you see the course design section. We've got backward design, learning objectives, course overview, introduction, learning activities, content selection, student assessment, course structure. These are all folded into each and every one of the rubrics that we have, because they're pretty universal when it comes to course design. So we're going to talk about backward design first. And if any of you have been to boot camp, which the majority of you have at some point, the thing that was always hammered on by Lori Richland, who's the one that created boot camp in the first place. I don't know if you all knew that. She created it for pharmacy back in the early 2000s. She concentrates on, if you look just below 1, 2, 3 here in the middle of the page, what we call TG low leap at this point. And this is what we've concentrated boot camp on to be over the past 3 years as we've morphed it. So that's teaching goals and learning objectives, which is what we provide our students in the first place. And then the next thing is the LE, which is your learning event, and then that leads into your evaluation plan. And that's chronologically how it happens and occurs to the student. However, when we start to create our curriculum and design our courses, it's actually backward design that we do. However, to make that the leap of TG, the leap that teaching goals and learning objectives lead to the learning event for the student that then leads to the evaluation plan. But the backward design is how it all occurs. So if we go back to this, backward design, these 2 different links that are there are not included because it's not part of your online learning rubric. It's just about backward design. And so Wiggins and McTighe are pretty much the standard fave that everybody loves when it comes to backward design. And they talk about identify your desired results first. So it's like, what are your outcomes more or less? Determine what the acceptable evidence is going to be, and then plan your learning experiences and instruction on that. And then to make it even more clear for your learner, your objectives are then going to be formed from that. So you see how we're going backwards in this case. So it's actually pretty standard. Now, when they talk about curricular priorities, they use this concentric circle diagram that you can see down at the bottom. And so you need to kind of look about what is it that it's worth being familiar with, right? Because you got to have that base knowledge. And if we go back to Bloom's, that's going to be the know and understand stuff at the bottom. What's important to know and do, and then the biggest thing that you should be assessing and evaluating on is things that need enduring understanding, and that's what your curriculum should be based upon, right? And it all makes sense. So much of this stuff, when you look at it and we read these rubrics, you're like, duh, of course, but somebody's actually put it down into steps that you can check, and just make sure that you have that check on yourself. Okay. The next thing after backwards design is learning objectives, and everybody's been pretty familiar with this. If this hasn't been beaten into your head at this point, I don't know what has. The thing that we need to remember first is SMART. They should be specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and time-bound, obviously. But if we start looking at the rubrics, and you're going to see, here, number 1 is quality matters, the first rubric here. So you can see we've actually cut and pasted the rubrics that you have, those specific parts that we're talking about. The course learning objectives, and I even need to take my glasses off to read these because they're tiny. Or course management competencies describe outcomes that are measurable. So that's back to the SMART. Module learning unit objectives or competencies describe outcomes that are measurable and consistent with the course level objectives or competencies. Once again, these all sound like common sense. But unless you're actually checking for them, sometimes we get caught up in the rest of what's going on in building the course or the curriculum that we forget the little minutia. And it's not minutia, it's actually important stuff that goes on. We drop down to the number 2 and we look at that. That's the CARE quality one. And CARE, as it comes from the business school, tends to be a little bit more broad at times. It doesn't focus so much on online. It's kind of overall course stuff, but it does bring the online. The first one, all course module learning objectives are specific, measurable, and clearly stated, given. The alignment between course and module level objectives is clearly shown. So alignment is important. Learning objectives include a range of higher level and lower level objectives related to each other and present a coherent structure for the course. So we don't always just go right to the higher level blooms. You've got to provide some of that lower level stuff. Doesn't mean that you're doing it in the classroom or directly synchronously with the students. That's stuff that can be assigned for reading, and that you delineate the learning objectives that say list, define, and describe, blah, 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 blah. Those are lower order, right? That's going to be know and understand at the very bottom. And then later on, we can say discuss blah, 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 and that's going to be apply as well as create and analyze. Does everybody kind of see where we're going with that? So having a mixture of those different level of objectives for your learners. And then the last thing, the learning objectives for the online and on-site versions of the course are consistent. So I know that you guys are mostly online. However, it's always good to make sure that you've got something that's viable for face-to-face as well as online. And when you do that and you ensure that there's that redundancy between the two, everybody's happy and there's less reworking of curriculum and courses in the end. Okay. Any questions on the first two? This is so unactive learning, it's not even funny. And the reason that it's unactive learning today is we had so much that we wanted to share with you. Because originally the way we were going to do it, and like if we had 2 hours or 2+ hours, we were going to talk about each one and then have you guys break into your groups in the tables to discuss which you guys thought was important for your particular course or even the curriculum, the nursing curriculum as a whole. So just because we've included this doesn't mean that you guys are going to necessarily. So it's good to look at the whole recipe and see what works for you and what doesn't work for you. That's what's wonderful about the Carey one. I think the Carey one was great because they were able to individualize it for their program at Hopkins. I thought that was wonderful. And when you read it, you're like, oh yeah, okay. I can see parts of this that are a little too broad and parts of this that are a little too narrow for what I particularly want to do in my course, in my class. So you guys have a lot of work to do in the way of you've got some great resources and stuff that we can talk about if you have any questions, but we're kind of just presenting you this broad overview of a lot of different detail points, and then it will be up to you guys to pick what's going to work for your curriculum overall. Consistency is going to be a good thing because it should be turnkey, and we'll get to that when it comes to course design as well, that specific branding, everything should look alike, everything should smell alike, so when every student goes from one course to the next, they don't have to dig and find where something else is. And you guys already know this because you've got your format set up this way. But not even just the physical structure of Blackboard, but even the way that the information is laid out underneath, right? Because we all do it a little, I think differently than Dawn does. Dawn's brilliant, so am I, but we do it a little bit differently, right? All right. So let's look at course overview and introduction. How many of you have taken online learning complete courses? I have. So did you have a class where they just kind of left you out there and you just like, you were in there and running and no one told you what was going on, right? Has anybody had that experience? I did.
Right now.
Right. Adam's like, I'm living it. I'm living the dream. And then there's the good course where they say, welcome to class, course da-da-da-da-da. We will be using X, Y, and Z. You know, you will find weekly modules that will outline the objectives that are there, what the learning events and activities are going to be, and what your assignments and requirements are going to be. And then when you get to that, everything is listed separately. The thing that's really nice about that course overview and introduction, and we'll get to this a little bit later, is that it's provided not only on the HTML digital page, but there's also the version that you can print out that has exactly the same thing there. And has this been done to you recently? It was done to me off and on throughout my my career for the doctorate.
Download stuff.
Yeah. So they make stuff that's not downloadable. So I don't know about you, but there are times when I'm trying to consume stuff in an airport and I don't have Wi-Fi. So it's stuff that you wanted to save online and you can't do that. And so there was a huge course redesign the last year that I was in my doctoral program, and they did it for the most part much better. But what they forgot to do was to give you things that had clickable links, and then you couldn't get it. Yeah. So there are little things that you realize as an online learner make your life a lot easier. So when we start looking at the overview and introduction, I'm going to jump to the OSCQR, which is number 2. So course includes a welcome and a getting started content, which is great. Those are always really nice. People like that little nicety of cordiality, saying welcome to blah, blah, blah. An orientation or overview is provided for the course overall, as well as what each module will entail. Course includes a course information area that deconstructs the syllabus for learners in a clear and navigable way. A printable syllabus, see number 4, this is my pet peeve, which is why it's here and why I went to number 2 originally. Course syllabus is available printable to learners, PDF or HTML. Makes all the difference in the world. So because when we get to UDL, which is further down, Universal Design for Learning, providing multiple formats for people to consume things is really important, and the syllabus is the main one. I don't know about you, but I always live and die by a syllabus as a student, right? I even do it as an instructor. My syllabus for my class that I'm teaching is tucked at the bottom of that folder right now because I refer to it all the time because that's the lay of the land. It's the rules of the game. Course includes links to relevant campus policies on plagiarism, computer use, student grievances, and accommodating disabilities. Why reinvent the wheel when it's already done on the university level through the course catalog? So if you're not already including those links, that's a really helpful thing for you. And you only have to update the link each year. You don't have to update all the verbiage. Course provides access to student success resources, technical help, orientation, tutoring via a button or so. I don't know if you guys do that already, but there's like a help button, and it will take them either to the links for LEAD or it'll get them right to the help page for IT. And since you have Gabriel in your midst, that shouldn't be a difficult thing to do. Course information states whether the course is fully online, blended, or web enhanced. That's always a good thing. Appropriate methods and devices for accessing and participating in the course are communicated. And then course objectives, outcomes are clearly defined, measurable, and aligned to student learning activities and assessments. So that's a really nice thing for your learner. Once again, that PG low leap thing. What's the learning objective? What is the learning event that is tied to that? And then how am I going to assess you for it? As a student, that's what I wanted to know. That's what we all want to know. Sometimes we kind of forget to do that. And then course provides contact information for instructor, department, and program. Any questions on that stuff? Once again, a lot of this stuff is just common sense, it seems, but we forget because there's so much of it. There's so much detail. Learning activities. Where are we here? I flipped too many pages. All right. So I'm going to jump down to number 2 because I love the carry thing. But you can see, or it's actually number 3. But you can just scan through the other ones because they're pretty big right there. The learning activities contribute to the achievement of the stated course and module learning objectives. So hopefully it's apparent to your student that what your activity is going to go back to that learning objective. And if you lay it out the appropriate way, like you could put 2 things next to each other, doesn't mean they're related. True? Have we seen that? Mm-hmm. So hopefully it's somewhat intuitive, and if it's not intuitive, at least explain to the student what you're trying to get out of that activity based upon what that learning objective is. Is it application? Because they may think that it's lower order, so do you need to tell them you should be able and prepared to discuss or to defend your point of view based upon X, Y, and Z? The course provides opportunities for students to actively engage in content that provides meaningful and authentic learning experiences. What do you think of that one? This is where you talk.
That you make it worth their while actually taking that course and not just put an activity there to kill time that is a waste of their time.
Right. Some hoop jumping, I've heard that from students. I actually used to say that. Any thoughts? Anybody else? Any other tables?
It's like individualize the course to fit your learners, because every time we're going to get unique learners, so you have to respect their culture, backgrounds, their learning styles, etc., etc.
So
I agree with that, but if we look at this particular statement, okay.
So maybe ideally you want to put a learning activity where you know they'll walk away having learned something.
Right.
Or
students are always talking about busy work as well.
Yeah,
right?
busy
Yes.
So,
Busy work.
Do this, but we're not getting it out of it.
Exactly.
One of the things that I've done with my syllabi is under each activity, I write down the purpose, and the purpose explains what the reasoning behind that activity and what they're going to get out of it. So it's very clear and it's right there.
Perfect. So that shows them why it's going to be meaningful. So, but I love that. I love the terminology, meaningful and authentic learning experiences, because as Rick said, the busy work and the hoop jumping, students can smell that a mile away. What is the one activity that they all say is busy work and hoop jumping?
ATI.
Discussion boards. People, no one wants to say it. Everyone's like, and it's one of these things where they're not always used in a meaningful way. And students can smell that a mile away. So it was done to me in volumes, and it was not done very well. And you could tell that it literally was, the instructor checked, did it come in by midnight? Was there 250 words or more? Were there 2 or more original citations? And was it done in APA format? And then you got the little check. And you could have put in there, Mickey Mouse rode to town, macaroni in his hat, you know, and they didn't read that. They just, that's what they were looking for. And then there was some cut and paste feedback occasionally. So they didn't even read the board, and they didn't insert themselves in the board in any way, shape, or form. And that's going to be something that's going to come up a little later on called instructor presence. So there are ways to use the discussion boards, and Rod had asked me what's the latest and greatest. And so we have a discussion board presentation brewing for you all on how to use them appropriately, how to use them authentically and meaningfully. Because the students can smell it a mile away if it's busy work, and they get a little disgruntled about it, and then we see it on the student evals later on, right? So and why do we like discussion boards as faculty? It's great. You're all looking at me because we all know this is a problem. Rod.
For my program, it was the way they documented attendance, because my PhD is getting old now, but the Department of Ed was very hesitant to provide student financial aid to online program students,
Right.
unless you could show attendance. And the attendance, by having the weekly discussion board, was how they satisfied Department of Ed rules.
So yeah, it was a little bit of a tick box thing.
But I think the intent, kind of what we discuss to students when they initially come in, is that, you know, what the discussion board is the discussion that you would have in the classroom. But the beauty of it is it's asynchronous, so you can someone can come in and have a discussion, then you can come in, you know, 24 hours later and contribute, and it's just like being in the class and having that discussion. But you know, people aren't having discussions with.
But is that really why we use them?
Right. Well, I think that's kind of like we're trying to get to that discussion piece.
This is why we use discussion boards, and then why do we really use them, Marcy?
Well, but I guess it depends on faculty. I mean, because we don't have face-to-face, I do want a place for some dialogue.
Right.
And something where, you know, people can ask questions or throw out challenges to each other, so that you see this scholarly dialogue. But I think, you know, there's a difference between being that intent and then having the time. You know, what happens is we either build too much, the students don't have time, or we build it in such a way that faculty doesn't have time.
Exactly.
And so they don't come out to mean what you want them to mean.
So when I use the discussion boards, I actually look at knowledge, real life examples and experiences. And then of course I look at APA and stuff like that. But it's, for the most part, I thought it is to make sure that the discussions are enriching their knowledge as well as experiences.
Hopefully. I mean, you guys are giving me.
And of course, they're very interactive, so we keep the discussion going.
Well, there's nothing worse than having a student post a discussion board, initial material, and then have nothing happen. In my brain, it just goes clunk.
Right.
And that's when I realized that the class is not engaged, or the student is late, or there was nothing interesting that the student said, so nobody kind of hooked onto it. So I think it's really up to faculty to, when those kinds of things happen, to then generate some excitement and ask questions, etc.
That's going to come to the faculty president. And you can see, like right now, granted, I've pushed this a little more active onto you guys for discussion. This is a whole nother Oprah for a whole nother day. Like, we could spend an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours on this to have some really rich in-person discussion. But a lot of times what you see for discussion boards is that it's a component of the grade that we can put on autopilot. So that literally I can assign 15 to 20% of the grade. I can look, did it come in at midnight? Did it have 400 words for the initial post? Is there 250 for the secondary follow-up post? How many citations there were, whatever. And so it's a quick and easy grade that I don't have to worry about something else. And that's literally how a majority of people do it. I'm not saying here, but I'm saying that is a big reason why discussion boards have such a bad name. It was done poorly to me, but I also participated in 3 or 4 during my career that were run incredibly well and done really well. And I would love to share some of that with you, as well as some of the research that's there. Whole nother Oprah for a whole nother day, because we got a lot of other stuff going on.
Yeah, I use the discussion board to build scholarly voice too. So,
yeah, it's a great, absolutely. But also, are you informing them, like Patty does, the discussion board will be used because we are elevating you up to a certain level so that you can communicate with your professional peers when you get out of here in a legitimate and scholarly way.
I want to go up and be like Patty.
Perfect. All right, and then content selection. So this is one of those things where we also get back to, if we flip back to the back of the second page, where you start to look at your backwards design. So we start to look at curriculum, and then you also, and each of the professions is very different here. So for us in the PA world, it's really easy. I go to the NCCPA, which is the National Commission on Certification for Physician Assistants. The board exam is there, and they have a blueprint, and the blueprint tells us exactly the topics that need to be covered. It also has all of the tests that need to be covered, and that's how we create our curriculum and our curriculum map, and to make sure all that is covered so that the students get to that. Everybody's a little bit different, so it's whatever process you guys have, but when you start looking at the content selection, the thing that I find, and we're all guilty of this because we're human, and we all have things that we find fascinating and interesting. And then the further you get up on the food chain in academia, you find the little things that excite you. Well, Adam, what is it that excites you these days? Because you're in the throes of doing this.
Well, active learning, promoting active learning.
And motivation, like motivational theories. So he can go down a total rabbit hole. So you look at nice to know, or need to know, nice to know, nuts to know. And sometimes we wander into that nuts to know category. And it makes our students crazy. They don't need to know that for boards. They don't need that to get out there, but dang it, I am gonna make sure that they get it. And I'm gonna have that damn test question on it. So keeping in mind that little concentric diagram about things that they absolutely need that enduring understanding of. That's the need to know stuff. The nice to know keeps it interesting sometimes. The nuts to know makes everybody's life a little bit crazy. So just things to think about with your content selection, and then looking at some of the things that are brought up in the Quality Matters rubric as well as the Carry one. The course content is current. So for me, what am I teaching next hour? I'm teaching HIV. It changes every year. It actually just changed again in October. I'm lucky this year that they changed it in October because normally they change the guidelines on January 18th, and I teach this unit during the first 2 weeks of February. So I actually had a couple months. It was awesome. But I have to be up to date because everything has changed. All of the recommended regimens have changed. So I've got to make sure that my content is up to date. The course content promotes student attainment of the learning objectives, and it also has rigor and clear value. So those are things to think about for student content selection. Student assessment. And this, once again, could have its absolute own presentation. But we start to look at the first one right here at the top, which comes from administration of online programs. They're talking about evaluation and assessment. So they're talking about assessment of the whole program, not necessarily about assessment of the knowledge that the student is learning, right? It's about all that other stuff. So making sure that you're paying attention to one or the other, because sometimes we have to wear the big hat for assessment. Sometimes we have to wear the little hat of evaluation, that evaluation plan of TG low leap. So that learning objective that links to the learning event that links to the evaluation plan. So you can see some of that stuff here, making sure that it's meaningful and authentic and all that good stuff that was listed there as well. So once again, drop down to the Carry one, which is number 4. The assessments measure students' attainment of course and module learning objectives. So I have a nutrition assignment. So I do a nutrition unit with the students. And then I make them do a nutrition assignment where they have to interview each other as a formal visit, and they have to write a SOAP note. They have to come up with a plan for each other. And it just got to be this unwieldy thing that it more had to do with there was hidden SOAP writing in it. All that stuff wasn't part of my class. And so it wasn't a real authentic assessment. I had to take a step back, and it was something that was fun and looked meaningful, and it was very pregnant and almost capstone-y, but it was in the middle of the first semester, so why was I doing it? So I had to take a step back and look at what's going on with that. So student assessment there. Instructions for the completion of all assignments are clearly stated. So the rubrics, are you providing rubrics, especially if it's not an objective type of activity? That's almost, you got to do it. And that's on the next page. Rubrics are provided for all non-objective assessments. Rubrics contain appropriate criteria and descriptive language for performance in each criterion and levels of achievement, which they call the scales of mastery when you get into rubric writing. The assessments are varied and represent a range of complexity, and the assessments include opportunity for real-world, authentic application of knowledge. What's the one thing that's always going to get your learners' attention? Relevance and real world. Why should I pay attention to you? How do you do that in your course? And that's going to be unique to each one. For me, a lot of times, I give a case study that's something that happened to me clinically, and what I missed, and how I wound up in hot water, and why they should pay attention so that doesn't happen to them, and that normally gets their attention. So real world and relevance is going to get you every time. Any questions on course design overall? I know it's fast and furious, but you got a lot of resources here to look at and things to pick through and say, yes, this is appropriate for me, this is not. All right, student engagement. So I heard this was a comment. How do we keep them engaged? Especially in the online world, that's tough.
By participating in the discussion yourself as the instructor running the online course. Like, post stimulating questions and then reflect back and ask them to share experiences.
Right. Excellent. And that actually begs the very next topic. If you flip back to the front page, I've got student engagement, and the very next topic is instructor presence and communication. Those two go hand in hand. How do you keep your student engaged so that they know that you're there on the other side? Many an online course, it's a black hole. Students just keep sending work and
Back and forth.
it just goes in and there's like, hello, hello, hello. So the discussion board, do they get substantive, do they get timely and frequent feedback on their posts? That's a lot of work for us. That's why discussion boards, they sound great, but they're a lot of work. There's ways to run them so that the work is a little bit less, but also, do you need a discussion board every week? Not necessarily. Do you need a discussion board every unit? But we kind of have defaulted to some of those behaviors. So maybe that's time to revisit that so that it's an appropriate workload for the student, but also an appropriate workload for the instructor. Still making sure that the assessments are authentic and meaningful, right? Because that's really what we're looking for. Can they demonstrate that to us and for us? So that's student engagement. So I like this one, the very first one, which comes from the digital courseware instructional practice rubric. Discussions are meaningful, aligned, and with course outcomes. The instructor clearly states expectations for participation in discussion forums. So not only do you do it in the very beginning, but you also course correct them with formative feedback each week to say, you know what, this would have made it an even better discussion and you would have gotten full credit if you had done X, Y, and Z. And sometimes we say, well, they should know that just from reading my rubric. Students need that little coddling sometimes. They need that formative push in the beginning. Towards the end, not so much. Instructor demonstrates presence by engaging actively and frequently throughout the course. Do you guys do that? I know that some of the etiquette here in the hygiene, discussion board hygiene, from what I've heard, is kind of more of a hands-off and let it happen organically within the discussion board. And that's also a teaching philosophy. I took evidence-based medicine online. Sounds like the most god-awful of course, doesn't it? Sounds really engaging, doesn't it? What do you think? It was the best discussion board in the world. And how did she do it? And she was a PT. She literally picked at every post that everybody put in there. So what Dr. Lopez was saying, how this person puts it out there and nobody responds. So what the instructor would do is she would actually ask or make one or two clarifying statements. Was nothing big, and I couldn't believe it. She was brilliantly talented at doing it. But she would ask that one question that would make it have to unfold one or two more steps from the person that posted it, and then beg the question for someone else to answer to. And she was brilliant at it, and she did it for the cohort within each discussion board was 15, I think. And that's about 12 to 15 is the maximum that you should be running a discussion board with. And we'll talk about that with the research the next time. Number 3 was what we talked about by engaging actively and frequently. Number 4, instructor provides a space for students to post an introduction and share appropriate parts of their personal life to develop an online learning community. So are you giving them ways to engage with each other? Because the discussion board doesn't always do that, because you can have these totally siloed, as We were talking totally siloed, not even conversations. It's just like, but I'm going to put out this statement. But do you write it into the rubric to say it is your responsibility to come up with a statement that also asks a question and engages your fellow classmates? Have you guys ever run a student-led seminar through a discussion board? You have the students run the seminar, the discussion board. And so you have them, it's a broad topic, you let them pull the literature piece that they want, that's something relevant to them, that interests them, you know, that rabbit hole that we went down, that's nice to know, nuts to know. They pick the topic, they have to write the précis on it, and they have to pose the 3 questions on the discussion board, and then they run it, and they see how difficult it really is. But the nice thing about this is you don't want to be the jerk that nobody responds to. So everybody goes out of their way to respond to everybody else's discussion board because they don't want anybody else to not do it. You also get graded on the number of people that responded and how well you ran the discussion board. So a couple different ways just with the discussion board on how do you pick at that, how do you make it authentic, meaningful, and how do you engage them. Instructor models effective communication techniques and etiquette. Instructor communicates to students what they should know in order to focus on the learning. All right, now we get to instructor presence. Pretty easy. We'll go to the carry one, which is B. Instructor's plan for communication response time and feedback on assignments is clearly stated. So you should put that also at the top. The requirements for student conduct and interaction are clearly stated. So we will conduct this in a professional manner. There should be no profanity. Hopefully nobody's doing that already. And things should be timely and respectful. Etiquette expectations for student communications are clearly stated. The course grading policy is clearly stated. And then just making sure that you're there, that you check in with them. Maybe have one synchronous event. Maybe, you don't have to, but one synchronous event is good. If you can't do a synchronous event, how about a video of yourself talking to them? That's big presence because it's actually you as opposed to the faceless person. I know at AT Still, which is where I completed my doctorate, every instructor was required to have a brand new video every semester. So you couldn't just rely on the old one because, you know, we all get a little bit older, balder, grayer, and we might like the one from 5 years ago. But they make you update it so that you keep it nice and current. Any questions on instructor presence? I like this one. Makes the course very personalized, and it has a lot to do with your teaching philosophy, I think. But you should definitely be there and be noticed by the students. They should know who you are. They should kind of know what your personality is a little bit through this. Does that make sense? I don't know about you, but there were many a course where I had no idea there was a name. Didn't know who this person was. They didn't even include a picture. It's not personalized. All right, and my last topic, and I'm just on time, so this is good. Universal design for learning. Is everybody familiar with this? We kind of hear about it, but we don't necessarily know about it. So I included for you, 4A is they put it as accessibility and usability for quality matters. So it talks about course just navigation facilitates ease of use. Information is provided about the accessibility of technologies required in the course. The course provides alternative means of access to course materials and formats. The course design facilitates readability. Course multimedia facilitates ease of use. So that's for quality matters. However, UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is its own movement. CDHP has a lot of information on this. And you can go to UDL, you can see the udlcenter.org. It's listed in the little snippet that I provided for you. This is not really a rubric, but what I've included for you is from the CAST website. So it talks about all the different levels of it. I'm not going to read it to you because it gets very intricate and arcane in places. Instead, if we look down at B in the 3 bullet points, are you providing multiple means of representation? Do you provide multiple means of action and expression? Do you provide multiple means of engagement? So that's what you should be providing, a smorgasbord for your students. Doesn't mean that each assignment you have to accept a video or a paper or a paper mache diorama or anything like that. It means that maybe one assessment is going to be a written paper maybe one assessment is going to be an objective exam. One assessment is going to be a portfolio. So I'm providing, and that portfolio can be multimedia with a video, with a presentation, any of those things. So you're giving everybody an opportunity to exercise their strength and show you what that they're able to show you what they've learned through what is their biggest strength. And so that's what universal design for learning is. We tend to not necessarily take that into account because in the health sciences, I think nursing is a little bit different. You guys definitely do more papers and other stuff. But over in comp, what is it? It's all multiple choice, objective, multiple choice, objective, multiple choice, objective.
We do PowerPoint presentations and videos as well.
Pardon?
We do PowerPoint presentations that we ask the students for, but we just did.
Perfect, yeah, so you're
with speakers notes, like scripted, and then sometimes videos as well.
Yeah, so perfect. So you're the one way to really know, to see what they know is if they can teach it to someone else, because they have to scaffold it and organize it and put it in other ways. So that's where we go with that. And then you've got more accessibility and usability comes under the universal design for learning. You can see that with the carry thing. And that brings me to the end because I need to go run and teach HIV. So I'm going to turn you over to the incredibly capable Adam Hain.
Can I ask you a question off topic?
Sure.
Do we get CEUs?
For this? No, you don't.
For the extra academic boot camp, do we get any CEUs?
No.
Not that either? 3 days, like for... As I'm renewing my license, I need to get my new CEU.
Those are for you. It was a lot of push, so I'm sorry for the passive learning.
Wait, no, that was good.
So I'm not sure why this. Oh, is it the wheel? Okay, it's the wheel.
Or you can also press just the button. We'll do it too.
Either way.
And this is the man with the doctorate in educational technology.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the remaining 4 topics from the beginning of the presentation. So we already talked about course design, student engagement, instructor presence, and UDL. I'm going to talk about technology integration, consistency and scalability, faculty development, and institutional support systems. The majority of what I'm going to talk about is the technology integration though. And if we go back to these rubrics, what we find is that a lot of the information, starting with number 5 on page 10, that's where I put the technology portions of the rubrics in there. A lot of this stuff has to do with security of data and also functionality of the technology systems, which is great. That's really important. But that's not going to be the focus of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the pedagogical implications of using technology. That said, there is a little bit of that dealt with in these rubrics. So if you look at B from the Quality Matters rubric, you have some stuff about active learning. From the Carry rubric, we have some stuff about discussions. And down at the bottom, in around where E is, you see some stuff about teaching and learning in there as well. So I wanted to point those out from the rubrics. But I'm not going to be going as much from the rubrics because there's less information from the rubrics on the topics that I'm talking about. So I have slides. One thing that I wanted to start with was that I think we all at this point recognize that active learning is a really important research-based modality that can increase the effectiveness of our learning outcomes. And I think that it's important to look at ways to adapt the active learning techniques that have been developed in the classroom and adapt them to our online modalities and not have them sort of get the short end of the stick compared to the classroom teaching active learning in the classroom. So I think we should be able to use the same measures in regards to active learning in the online classroom that we do in the face-to-face classroom. So what are some of those ways that we can implement active learning? Well, these 2 books are based around classroom teaching, especially the classroom assessment techniques, and that's going to be one of the major texts that you'll find, and this came out in the 90s. It's very popular, very well known. Angelo and Cross developed 50 classroom assessment techniques, and many of you have probably heard of these. These are like muddiest point and pair and share, these little things that you can do in the classroom. So these techniques can be adapted pretty easily to online environments, especially if those online environments are synchronous. So if you're conducting your online course with synchronous elements like video chat using Zoom or Adobe Connect or something like that. Another existing text that I would point you to is Student Engagement Techniques, and this is a really good book as well. So it begins with a discussion of motivation, which is really interesting in online modalities, and it talks about both online and classroom techniques, but the third section of this long book is, I think it's 60 of those same kind of classroom assessment techniques, takes the same kind of format as Angelo and Cross and just gives you actual assignments that you can use. But what's nice about this book is it presents sort of a scale of how adaptable these assignments are to online environments. So it's really nice, it's really detailed, really well written. So I can't recommend this book enough for just taking existing active learning techniques and adapting them and putting them right into your online courses. So there's plenty of stuff that's already been done to create online assignments that incorporate active learning. The next thing I want to talk about is the holistic learning environment in online learning and adapting educational technology. There's a few different frameworks that we can look at, but the one that's the most well known is called TPAC, and this framework is adapted from earlier work by Lee Shulman. What his argument was that in order for effective teaching to take place, a teacher needs to possess their content knowledge, obviously, so knowledge of the content being taught, but also knowledge of pedagogical knowledge, so how to teach that material. Later on, the TPAC model was developed by Kohler and Mishra, and they incorporated technological knowledge into this framework as well. So I think this is especially relevant when we're talking about teaching online, because all elements of teaching online involve some sort of technology. So you'll notice also what I find interesting is that context is around the three. So what they're arguing is that in order for effective teaching to take place, TPAC knowledge, which is the one in the middle, involves all three of these, and is also included in the context of the learning environment. So that's one model to look at the technology incorporation in online environments. I would mention a couple others that I didn't include just for reference. There's a model called the Seymour model, which was developed by Ruben Pointedera, which is interesting to look at, talking about the actual levels of integration. So how deep is the technology integrated into your learning environment? Another one that I'll mention briefly comes from EDUCAUSE, which refers more to the actual learning environment. They call this the NGDLE. So there was a really interesting article that I've listed here that came out about 2 years ago that describes this next generation digital learning environment. And what they're talking about is what the LMS is going to look like in the future. So I know that different people have different levels of affection for the LMS in Blackboard. But we hear a lot of complaints about how the LMS functions and things that we would like better, both from the student end and from the teacher end. So this article talks about, well, if that learning environment, this online learning environment were perfect or had all those ideal characteristics that instructors want, what would those things be? So this is something that hasn't been developed yet, but there's a lot of different people working on this in new and interesting ways to develop this environment and bring in this sort of environment that can integrate all these different aspects. So there's 5 of them listed there. I don't think that there's one LMS that really does that. Although the existing LMSs have kind of caught on to this idea and are trying to adopt techniques and technologies that allow for better integration. One of those includes LTI, which is an integration protocol that Blackboard does have as well. So these things are starting to happen. What those protocols allow you to do is incorporate other tools into the LMS, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, because there's tools that exist outside the LMS that are really important and useful for teaching and learning that we can begin to integrate when we talk about the holistic environment, the holistic online environment. So an example of that goes back to our discussion that we were having earlier about discussion boards. So, and I'm going to give an example of a class that I'm in. So in this class, there are 4, I have 5 here, but that's from another example that I'm giving. So in this class, there are 4 different types of discussion that we have, and they're not all necessarily discussion boards, but that is one of the types of discussions that we have. And this is just an example of utilizing different types of communication technologies. Even though that is a Blackboard school, we're not even necessarily in Blackboard for a lot of this stuff. So one example of discussion is synchronous whole group video. So we all get together as a class for a short period, and not necessarily to have a lecture, but to discuss readings and different topics, and we usually have a set of questions. So that's the whole class getting together, you know, like 30 people in a group all together in a discussion. The second example would be, it's like there's this environment that they use where you can have an article, and that article is highlighted, and different discussion threads are built off of those highlights. And the particular platform is called ND. It was developed by MIT. But what happens is usually the instructor will highlight an area of a document that we're supposed to be discussing, and we'll start a thread off of that. So you'll have the threads directly related to a PDF that we're all talking about. So that's another discussion environment. We have a threaded discussion, which is pretty typical, that you would, same kind of thing that you would see inside of Blackboard. We also do, which is my favorite, we do small group synchronous discussions. So the class will be split up into small groups of like 4, and we'll have the freedom to set up a time to have our discussion. And each of us will have roles in that discussion. So one week you might be a facilitator, the next week you might be like a note taker, and there's other roles. There's 4 of them. So what you do is you get together and meet in small groups and discuss the readings or the topics for that week. And a 5th way, which is not in this particular class that I'm talking about, but was something that we did at Cal Poly, was have student seminars for our discussion boards. So what that means is that the students will break up into groups and lead the discussion board for that week in a threaded Blackboard discussion. So what would normally happen typically would be that the group of students would set up with some content and have like a couple pages of content, links and videos and things like that that are related to the week's discussion. They'll set up that discussion and post that in Blackboard, and the rest of the students will discuss the topics that were presented by those students, and the students actually respond to all the discussions instead of the teacher. So just some other ways of thinking about running discussion boards. And like Tim said, we're going to do a lot more information about discussion boards and different ways to run them, but there are some creative ways to think about changing them so it doesn't become so onerous on the instructor, but is still engaging for the students. And these are just some of those examples. So one thing that I would say is that there is a lot of research out there, especially since I've been reading so much, is about incorporating different technologies into your online environments. And I included, I sent a document to Dr. Hicks with a list of a bunch of research, and I have it here too if you want to take a look. But if you look at the specific technologies that you're trying to incorporate, there is tons of research out there for most of them. And an example that I would offer is adding interactivity to videos. So I just read about maybe 10 articles about different levels of interactivity that can be added to video to make it more engaging in online environments. And the different, research will look at different types of interactivity, from being able to scroll, to be able to go in double time in the video, to having a table of contents in the beginning of the video. And one big one is adding questions in between the different segments of video. And so that research is really interesting because it will look at how effective these particular components are when incorporating video into online environments. So you can really make research-based decisions about how you're going to incorporate video. So we use a lot of Articulate, Storyline here in the different colleges. And there's a lot of options, and then you can make things that are sort of like videos because it can be kind of a one-way push of information. But if you apply those research principles to choosing the options in that content, you can make decisions based on the research. So why should there be breaks in the video to have questions? Well, according to the research, there should be because of X, Y, Z. So it's really useful to look at the current and existing research because it's out there and it lets you make those decisions based on more than like your hunch, right? And so I've included a lot of research that I've been reading, but there's tons out there, and we're happy to look into some of those research studies too. So here I have, this goes back to the course design, but I included it in here too because it's so important, I think, to use the technology to let your students know where they are and where things are in the environment. So, and this is listed in every one of these rubrics, and I've read it in a couple of texts too, just evidence saying that you want to have like a start here portion of your course and a map. And consistency in the course shell is really important because it lets the students not spend time and waste cognitive energy on finding things in your course, more focusing on the course content. And that goes not just for course navigation and location of content in the course shell, but also consistency and clarity in assignments, what the interactions are going to be between like the student-student interactions, the student-teacher interactions, and the student content interactions. So what are those going to look like and how are they going to function? What do they do? How long should they be? And what's going to be expected of the students? If those things can be communicated more clearly, you will have better luck with persistence of their motivation. And I included, so this is some of the stuff that's in a lot of these rubrics, but we want to include backup plans for technologies, not just if technologies fail or the power goes out or things like that, but also if you decide to maybe use a tool and it doesn't go the way you want, or it becomes really onerous, or students don't understand it. There can be a lot of different things that can happen when you try to incorporate a new tool. And I don't want to say that to discourage people from trying new things, but you want to have a backup. And I'll give an example. So I teach also a class online at Cal Poly, and last year I decided to, instead of using the Blackboard discussion board, I decided to use this app called Flipboard, which is like a news aggregator, kind of like Apple News, which you can post articles. So you can create articles and post them to this platform, and you can also post existing articles. So my idea was that I would have the students post articles that they found interesting and related to the week's topic, and I would also post the readings in this platform, and everybody would comment on it, and it would be really great and really interactive, and I still feel like it was a good idea, but the platform itself had issues because it wasn't really meant to be set up as a discussion board, and I didn't know that until I really tried to do that, and I ended up with like hundreds of comments. You know, things would happen, like I tried to move an article to a different section and all the comments would disappear. And, you know, the students freak out because they think they're not going to get credit for the comments. That's one example of something that went wrong, but there are several. So it was really hard to manage. The data was also not very useful to me. Another thing that I was doing was trying to comment back on everyone's comments. So it ended up being a lot of work for me. There was a lot of dissension and worry in the students. So if I would have had a better backup plan or been ready to abandon that technology, even if I thought it was a good idea, I might have been able to just go right over you just go to Blackboard discussion boards within like the second week, and that would have solved my problem. But I didn't have a backup plan, and I made it through the quarter, and that's fine. But I would suggest having a backup plan, especially if you're trying to use a new technology or an existing technology inside of Blackboard that you just haven't used yet. So kind of taking a step back and thinking, what am I trying to accomplish with this exercise? And maybe coming up with a couple different ways to accomplish that just in case. The reason why I have a picture of polling up here is because another example of this in a synchronous environment would be we have a couple of different colleges using different types of audience response systems, and a couple of the colleges have had some problems with the technology. So we have some people in comp that have just gone to colored paper, like raising their hands with colored paper for voting, right? So I mean, but it works in its own way, right?
Yeah, I think one of the barriers is the network. And I believe it's firewalls, because it works beautifully at home. And so, and you know, I appreciate you saying to have a backup plan, because there's always a plan B, right? I always have a plan B. But I come here, set it up, test it out, and there's connectivity issues between that. For example, the polling is one of the things. So what I end up doing is I end up running it on my laptop instead of using the podium, you know, especially in prem. I use my laptop and it seems to work okay, but the network sometimes, I think, limits some of our technology use. And I'm a believer in using a lot of the new technology as interactive strategies. And that's what I find is one of the major barriers.
Yes.
The firewalls. So I don't know if we can talk to IT or not. But.
Absolutely, and I mean, I'm just kind of using that as an example, so I'm not super privy to what exactly is going on, because different colleges are using different response systems. I do know that I think we're coming up on adopting a new system, but that's all I'll say about that. I like to, since we're on the subject real briefly, I've had some really good success with using asynchronous polling, and if anybody wants to know about that, I can go into a little bit more detail. But what I've been able to do is use the tool like Poll Everywhere and embed that onto a presentation slide, and that could be in PowerPoint or in Articulate. So on one slide, I'll have like the question, the polling question, and a participant can enter an answer. And on the next slide, I've embedded the graph of results, which will update live. So it's a really neat way to incorporate polling into an asynchronous environment. And that's why I kind of came up with this example too, because I had to go through a couple different iterations before I found something that actually worked technically. So it was important to try a couple different things and test them out before I actually used that, especially for outside. This goes back to a lot of the stuff in the rubrics. We want to make sure our data is secure, and I know that's pretty much an IT thing, but where it comes back to us is when we start talking about using some of these outside tools. So if we are using a tool that we adopt on our own, something like an app like VoiceThread or Flipboard or Poll Everywhere, or something that's not actually housed, the data isn't housed by the university, we want to make sure that if we have data that's sensitive, we're aware of that if it's being stored by a third-party company. And we want to also, on that same topic, make sure that if we're using a platform like that, we're able to get that data out if we need it. So a lot of these third-party companies will make it difficult for you to get data out of their systems. And I know that people have said that ExamSoft is sort of an example of that, where it's all good if you're inside of ExamSoft trying to look at the data, but if you want to pull it out and put it in a different, like SPSS or something, it can be challenging. So it's just something to be aware of. If you're going to be working with the data a whole lot, first of all, is it practical? So can you download that data from that platform into something like Excel? And secondly, are they going to make it easy for you if you want to get it out? Or are they going to hold it as a proprietary theme. So I'll go through these pretty quickly. So I had 3 more topics, and I have tons more to say about technology, but I don't have time. So consistency and scalability is one of the things that's mentioned in these rubrics as well. So we talked about that a little bit earlier, and that the primary area where that's important, I would say, is with your course design, just so your students know there's at least a minimal amount of consistency between courses. Now, I know that I've had this conversation with a lot of faculty members as well. I mean, you want to be able to have the freedom to design your course in the way that makes sense for you and for your content. So I think there's a happy medium that can be reached in course design and consistency. So the way we've worked on a couple of different templates for putting content into the LMS, and what the solution that we came up with was to have a consistent set of buttons on the left that are all the same for every course in a program, or even in the whole college, or even university-wide, so that everything is always the same. But there's a section of content buttons for the instructor to put whatever they want there. So you can have specific content or your specific organization style in that free area, but as far as from the student perspective, you can know that, like, at the very top is start here, at the second one is the syllabus, so it's something like that. So there's a medium that can be reached between course design consistency and academic freedom for the faculty members, and I think that it's important to be able to find that. So across a program, these are some of the things that to think about when thinking about how things should be the same for the students. So I just talked about content organization. It's important for technology to try to, as a college or as a program, adopt the same tools. If every instructor is using their own sort of mix of tools, it can be confusing to learners. And I know that some teachers are going to want to adopt particular tools they like, but if faculty can meet and be on the same page about the type of tools that they're going to use, that can be important. Overall curriculum coordination is obviously going to be really important, but communicating that to the students can be useful to them. So how does this course fit into the overall degree program? I know in like our master's, some of those courses, I could see how that course relates to instructional design overall, but sometimes that wasn't directly communicated. Like, why is this class part of this degree? How does this fit into the overall curriculum? And I think that would have been nice to have sometimes. And help services as far as IT and where to go, CEHP, things like that should be coordinated program-wide. Uniform messaging as far as the values of the institution should be present as well. And I just kind of talked about this. So where are you in a program and where are you going longitudinally is important for the learner. And important to be consistent. So maybe if there's a statement in the beginning of each course or even module that shows how this fits into the curriculum and in the program overall. Branding is one of the things that's mentioned in this CARE rubric. So if you want to look at some of their standards, what I did was just cross out CARE and put WesternU for each one. But these are some good things to think about when creating your online environment, and you can do a lot of these things in Blackboard, and Francis is a big help with that. But they're the kind of decisions that you probably want to make university or college-wide, and having those branding colors and CGN logos and things like that. Things to think about distributing to all courses so they all kind of look the same. Faculty development, close to our hearts at CAPE. We have some recommendations for online certifications that we can offer. The OLC, they have a few different ones. There's a sort of intro to online teaching and advanced online teaching and instructional design certifications. These are a little bit cheaper than the QM ones. I haven't gone through either one, so I don't know. I can't speak to the quality of these certifications, but they are out there and they can give your faculty that teach online something that they might be a little bit more motivated to go through because they can walk away with it. It's an industry standard certification, and relatively speaking, they're not that expensive, so it's something to consider. Especially, I guess, from my perspective as an adjunct, it's important to let your faculty know what's expected of them, where they can go if they need help, what some of the standards are for their course design. So, for example, does everything need to be in Blackboard, or can I use a different LMS? You know, I mean, as long as adjuncts and faculty, for that matter, know what is going to be expected in terms of that learning environment, it can make life a lot easier for them. Another opportunity for faculty development, I think is pretty imperative, is letting people know at least the basics of copyright. I think especially in online environments, you're going to be using tons of multimedia, and being able to know what multimedia can be used and why is important. Here are some of the major types of affordances that are out there. I included other because a lot of the media that you do find online doesn't clearly state what kind of copyright affordances are available. So if you go to image repository, you might find that it says free for educational use. So that's not a really clear copyright affordance. Like, what does that mean? Is it fair use? Is it public domain? Probably not. So in that case, sometimes you still need to contact the copyright holder. So technological assistance, that's going to obviously be really important for faculty and require integration with IT here. But as long as you can provide some kind of orientation to them about where to get that help, it can be really useful. And I mean, you guys are lucky because you have Gabe here, but it's an important consideration as well. And Ryan, sorry. Just because Gabe came from IT. So yeah, but having those opportunities to interface with IT, not only for like IT help, but also for further faculty development is an important consideration. And then I included this because this is the ideal building where CAPE will eventually be housed, with big sunny windows and people talking to each other. But you do have opportunities at CAPE to come and interact with other colleges, and that's in person, but also online. So we do post all of our workshops and presentations online, and we're also open to finding answers to specific questions, as well as adopting different modalities of having workshops. So we've done things like ed camps. We're having these fairs where we go around to the different colleges and answer specific questions. So we're looking at different models of doing faculty development, and we're open to suggestions and requests. Just really quick. Institutional support systems. So we have these support systems, which I've listed here, and the key challenge is trying to figure out how we can provide equivalent services to those online students. So how can, and I mean, it requires interfacing with these specific organizations at WesternU, but we want to make sure that we are providing all these services to our online population as well. And with that, it's 10:15. So, any questions?
What's your favorite active engagement strategy as far as for any type of app that you use primarily for active engagement during course, during class?
As far as when I'm teaching?
Yeah. is your go-to app when you're trying to encourage engagement in class?
Right. I mean, to be honest, what I am a big believer in right now is just video conferencing. So, and I know that's not possible if you have an online class that's fully asynchronous, but for example, like in my class, I am having them do every other week have a synchronous meeting, a whole group discussion. So it's not necessarily as much of a lecture, it's more like an hour where we meet and discuss something. And on those off weeks when we don't meet, they have to meet with their groups. So they have to meet synchronously with their groups. They can do it any time of the week that they want, but they need to meet. If they can't make it to the whole group discussion, I've given them an affordance where they can like watch the video of the discussion and answer those questions that were the discussion's questions in the synchronous discussions, because I'm not able to require the class to be synchronous. So technically those synchronous elements are optional, and there's a way for them to still participate in that. But I feel like those synchronous discussions are really valuable. You know, and I think threads and discussion threads like in Blackboard can be valuable as well, depending on how you set them up. But I just find it's so much less onerous on the faculty member and on the students to just have a set discussion and then move on with other work for the week. But having to kind of constantly log in and check those threads. And then there's the question also of, like, if you're one of the people that posted in the beginning, do you come back at the end and circle back at the end to see what all the other people said about your post? Because what I've seen, and it's kind of frustrating, you'll see somebody post something that's really interesting and a bunch of people will respond to that post, and then that person doesn't ever respond to those responses. So it's like, did they see them? You know, so they lost that valuable input on the thing that they said. And it's not like they don't care. Maybe they didn't have time to come back in, or you know, they had to move on to other things. So right now I feel like adding some kind of synchronous element to those online courses can really increase engagement. Go ahead.
So I'm just curious, because I have tried synchronous activities and it was very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, when you have multiple groups, you have to schedule time. How, for these types of things, how long are you involved, number one, which I'm assuming you are, but how long? Are we talking half an hour? Are we talking an hour?
Great. Yeah, totally. So for the whole group discussions, I'm definitely there. I would say like hour to hour and a half. And that counts as kind of like the class time. It won't be the full, like, 3 hours though that you would expect out of a lecture. As far as them meeting in their own groups, it can be as long as they want, and I found from experience that it goes longer than is required, but the general requirement is like 45 minutes.
And are they required to record their?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, and then I didn't mention that. So the way it's verified is they record their group discussion and they post their video, so that I, as the instructor, can look and see, okay, was this actually a productive discussion? And even if, the fact that they know it's getting recorded and posted makes the discussion a lot more substantive.
You spoke about having interactive video as one of the strategies for active learning. So what are the softwares out there for interactive video? This is the first question. The second question, if there's already established video, for example, from some of our vendors, can you then incorporate some interactive ways to make that form of interactive instead of just flat out video?
Okay, great. So the first question was about software. So if you want to make video interactive, there's a couple of different things that we have as a university that you can use. One is Articulate, so you can bring video into Articulate, you can chop it up and put questions into it. Second one is our media site lecture capture software. So you can bring lecture capture. I'd have to check with IT, but in fact, I'm positive. You can upload outside videos that you've created, and then inside of MediaSite, you can add things like multiple choice questions, polling. It's really easy. There are also other third-party softwares. So there's a software called Edpuzzle, which is really cool, and it's free, and so that's another way that you can add interactivity to videos. And what's nice about that particular one is you can just take a link to a YouTube video or a Vimeo or something like that, bring that in, and add questions to an existing online video. Another option is, I forget, I think I was going to say H5P, that's another one, but there's a few different ones.
I didn't hear you mention collaborate within the Blackboard. Have you used that one? It seems we just came from a conference where a lot of the faculty were really married to that collaborate in the Blackboard.
Yeah, absolutely, and I've used Collaborate as well. We kind of go back and forth between Zoom and Collaborate. I think that they're both great. Collaborate is set up a little bit better, actually, for web conferencing in like an educational environment, I feel like. Zoom has a chat thing, and they have different kind of polling things that you can do. But Blackboard Collaborate has really progressed a lot in their web conferencing. So that's a great platform too. They're both really great. Adobe Connect is another one. It just kind of depends on what your institution subscribes to. And I know that we here have Zoom, but do we have access to Blackboard Collaborate as an institution? No. So, I mean, that would make the choice a lot easier, I guess.
We abandoned it for Zoom.
Yeah, and
so if Collaborate's grown, then it would be an organizational decision which one to support. So right now we're Zoom people.
Yeah, and I would agree with that decision. I mean, I think Zoom is it's so easy to use. The video quality is so great. And we're talking about instructor presence. I mean, having that high quality video, web video, I mean, that really makes it a lot more like a face-to-face class. So in the courses that I'm in, all these people in my class are like all over the world. And it feels like I'm in a class with them, even more so than some of the face-to-face classes that I've taken.
What class do you teach?
I teach a class called Alternative Learning Environments, so 578. And last year, it's been blended up until this year, and this year I'm going to be teaching it fully online. And I'm excited about it because I'm going to be incorporating some of these video chat sort of elements to create those synchronous components. And I don't have to drive in.
Okay, well, Dr. Hicks had to leave, so on behalf of Dr. Hicks and all of us, I'd like to thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, we had a lot of content because it was a pretty big question. So hopefully it wasn't too kind of jumbled, but if you want any information to follow up, we're happy to speak a little bit more on any of the particular things that we talked about, because there's a lot, it's a broad topic, and we talked about a lot of broad topics inside of that. So we're happy to come by and appreciate you having us.
Thank you so much. I just want to say 2 words in why we had this session. So first, I want to thank everybody for being here. I really appreciate your time. I know this is a really busy time of year, so thank you for that. But we're doing some major curriculum changes right now, and many of you are involved in building courses. And it might have been a while since you took a course design class or looked at that information. And so that's why we have this in the month of February, because I know that our courses for the summer are due in about a month, right? March 30th. And we're all working on the 6th semester in SNE. We're working on the EMP certificate courses, and who knows what we'll be doing in the future. So thank you guys so much for being here. This information will be where for us to look at in the future?
We've given it to Dr. Hicks, but we can kind of prepare a little package where it's all together and send it to you directly if you want.
Right, because there are some team members that weren't able to be here this morning for various reasons, and they also will be designing some courses. So I'd love for people to be able to use it in the future.
Okay, and I think that Gabe set record. It was going out via Zoom. I'm not sure if he recorded it, but we can probably put that together with the video.
Great. We'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, I'm an employee, yeah.
I mean, you know, we don't always have.
Sure, sure.
You have,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got something. And I teach a doctoral course.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. Yeah, and that's what, so, there, since we have students, and so I'm in school, that's the area, and I also teach in the park. That's why it's kind of confusing, I work here. But what they've done is important for people like that can't make it to the synchronous meeting, is they have to watch the discussion video, and that works. And like I have a couple of students that have a class at the same time as mine, so they can't really make it to any of the synchronous meetings.
No, and that makes sense to me, because you can't force it, but what happens is the students that find value will start making the time for it, but they can't. At the same time, you built up these, so, when you talk about the student groups like being more people, but when you do the synchronous with you, you still keep it as a core, does it become a larger group?
Oh, with me, yeah, I do the whole class, so it might be 25. Another way that I've seen it done though is like the groups meet on their own and they email the instructor when they're going to meet, and they meet, and the instructor comes in for like the last 10 minutes to answer any questions. Yeah, they debrief with the instructor. Yeah, so I've seen that done too, where I go into the room and meet with them just for the last
Well,
part.
and I think we've done things like.
Well, and in my view of, if we get all of our courses done by March 30th, that gives us time to check this. So April needs to be spent pretty well online, trying to check it out.
Anyway, I'll probably be in touch, but thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to hearing about it.
Yeah, I have a question for you. So I was trying to find I found this one, and I was just gonna go down. You're hearing me. It's the ISD.
I haven't. I know of the organization, but I haven't been to the conference, so I don't know. I know that it's a really well-known organization, and it does have a lot of focus in K-12. That would be the only drawback that I would look at. So we might want to look at what the contact areas are for the conference. Some conferences that I have been to that I would recommend, especially, is the Online Learning Consortium. They have one called Accelerate. I think they have a couple, so you want to be careful because they have little ones that are regional, but then the big one is every year in Florida, and that was awesome. All kinds of stuff. Yeah, OLC. It's the one in Orlando, and it's pretty awesome, and it had a lot of different content. Another one that I would look at is Educause ELI conference. So that's going to be in Anaheim next year. So those two are pretty good. I would check those out. Another one, I'm not sure. Tim, I've never been to it, but Tim went to it. Thought it was really good. It's called POD, and I'm not sure if that's more geared towards faculty development or not. But I've heard that that's really good too. But of those, depending on what you're looking for, I thought the OLC one was surprisingly useful.
Because right now, like, I don't have a very good understanding of a lot of things. So that's kind of where I was going with this one. It had a lot more general topics, like just how to set up, you know, a course Blackboard, and, you know, a lot more things like that. So this is great to know this one shape, right? If that's like something I want to learn more about, maybe this one is probably
Yeah, no, I mean, that one, it could be amazing. I've just never been to it.
Yeah.
And then they're super well known. They're a big organization.
Yeah, I was
So.
looking at their like program from last year, and I was kind of going, I was like, well, can I use this? And so they had a lot of like, you know, first level type stuff. So I was like, oh, maybe that's a good idea for me. So, okay, cool. But I'm glad that you know about it because I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I just actually like signed up to be like a member, like a free member.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay, no,
yeah, because I mean, they have a lot of like standards. They're one of the bigger organizations in sort of technology and online learning.
I was worried about
so,
that. That's what I was really worried about.
Yeah, there's ISTE and then the AEST, Association for Educational Technology. A something. They have a big conference too. For EDUCAUSE too, be careful because there's EDUCAUSE conference and there's EDUCAUSE ELI conference. And the EDUCAUSE conference is more like technology. The ELI one is more like teaching one.
Okay.
So you want to look for the ELI one. And the same thing with OLC. You want to find the one it's usually in Orlando because they have a bunch of regional ones that are all small. You don't want to waste your thing.
Right.
The small one. So the big one.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the main ones.
Okay, I just want to know because I didn't, like I said, I didn't know anything about it. So
Yeah, where is it? Is it something cool?
It's in Chicago. This
Oh,
year.
nice.
I don't know if that's cool or not, but it depends on the person. Yeah. So anyway, but I thought that was pretty cool. I think we could get these. Coming into this, you know, I was in charge, so it's like a whole other.
What are you doing now?
Right now, assisting Dr. Stone with
kind of left those.
hours to keep the track, but also helping him.
That's a document. Yeah.
And so it's really useful when we're having our discussions to kind of know what is available because they're always coming up with ideas.
All the people have some problem.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm having
There's some cool stuff that people are doing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so it's like, well, you know, let me at least get my bearings because I don't know. I mean, I know training because of HR, but it's different when you're versus like a trainer, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not quite, or what we're trying to get better, you know?
Yeah, that context is a little
It
different.
is different. So, you know, teaching students is a lot of different. So, anyways, but yeah, I'm so glad because I was a little worried about that because I proposed it as I don't really know, and I was perfect person to ask. At least he'll know if it's like legit or not.
Yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed that OLC one. I mean, it's all in Florida.
Yeah.
But I guess it's flying.
Yeah, I'll look at that one too, just in case. I'll try to take a look at that program too.
Yeah, and I'll look at the ISTU one. I mean, I know that I should be looking at it more, so.
Yeah, it has a lot of, I like their program, it had a lot of stuff kind of in between.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to.
I know it, and what I don't know yet. So it was a lot more like,
Before I say,
not very techy.
Because
So it's
we
kind of
also
like
changed the brand.
talent.
So I
But I don't know, I mean, take this further.
I don't know how hard
Right now, it's like,
for HSL or for A&M, it seems like this program, I think she has different.
She has different.
It's
Yeah.
fun though, yeah.
it is fun, because I like that too, like what motivates, because what motivates people, you know, exercise, so it's just a different take on that. So,
That
Yeah,
would be up to
totally.
yeah, cool, well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
For coming, it was really fun.
Yeah, I guess see you.
We'll try to find that consistency in the range like we did before.
Actually, Ryan's coming Thursday, right, to work on 7570 Blackboard. Did you say it was on it?
It's not on my calendar, but if it's this Thursday, just send me.
Okay, I'll check it
I'm
out.
free on Thursday.
Unless we had something really pressing we need to do. I feel pressed that we gotta have the courses ready by the end of.
Actually, yeah, I think we have,
Hey, how have you been?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
No, I'm still working.
So
that's
Something new?
Yeah.
Not really, it's just kind of the same. Well, it's crazy because every course is changing now, so,
The Thursday, Wednesday.
yeah, I'm going
Yeah,
in
but
and
we're talking about, I'm talking
I'm
about
changing
the incoming summer.
in
Okay,
maybe
that's what I-
12
So I
courses
saw
a
that
semester.
information and I started.
Wow.
So,
I'll be sitting-
So you're
there's
talking
one
about
thing that
the-
I was wondering the college kind of supports is, do we have any like engagement software that has automatic like legacy
Yeah.
updates?
So I wanna-
Because that's the problem I'm having is a lot of the stuff that
Yeah.
develops that's a year and a half or older tends to break because, you know, all the browser updates and like, it's funny because it works on really old IE, like IE 9, 10, and then it's breaking in the newer Chrome and the newer Firefox. Like the older articulates are starting to break in the newer browsers. I was wondering if we had like,
So if you like republish articulates, we try to do that, we just repost them, like, because they update their articulate software. But if it's the newest version, if you republish it and it's still broken, then it won't do it automatically though.
yeah, it's not that it's not technically broken. It's just certain elements will show up, and then when you put it back into the new articulate, those elements are still not there, even in the edit view. So, but if you go into the HTML, they're there. They're just not showing up, which is really weird. And then when you publish it, it's still not there. So it's hard for me to keep checking all the articulates that we make.
Yeah, so no, I hear you with that though. I mean, you
Yeah.
don't have to like keep updating every articulate you've ever made.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'm gonna do it.
Yeah. So
Yeah, but as far as the thing's not working, even when you republish, that
some do, some don't.
are you talking about storyline or studio?
It's both. Both.
Are they like uniform elements that aren't working? Is there a particular feature that's not working?
Like so at the end of certain modules, it aggregates the data and then posts it, right? At the very end.
You mean the swarm data?
Swarm data.
Okay, yeah.
So the aggregation, some of it doesn't work right. It's not picking up certain elements.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, swarm's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Just always. Anyway. But
so, and students freak out when
they don't get a grade.
They don't get the grade right, and I'm like, okay, so I have to go in and figure out what's not being shot off into Blackboard. It's kind of a pain.
No, that's been one of the major pains of using Articulate for me too, because the content is cool, it looks good, and it's interactive and all that stuff. But when you talk about the quiz and the swarm data, it works pretty good, but it doesn't if I do 100 students, which I regularly I'll have, I'll not get 5. So what do? You're going to give them all 100 then because you didn't get those 5 people. So that's been really annoying to me. And I've talked to Blackboard repeatedly and not really gotten just a bunch of BS. And Articulate will do kind of the same thing. They'll be like, well, it works fine, so it must be Blackboard. So that's been pretty much what I've gotten. I feel like if you're going to have a high stakes test, kind of just do an exam soft. Don't use Articulate for something that's super high importance as far as a quiz. There's also that, I don't know if I've told you about that Grassblade database.
No.
So there's a database that we set up for comp more so because they don't use Blackboard. So we like purchased a database that's like a plugin for WordPress. And so you can post the Articulate module in WordPress, and then the students go through it, and that data is transferred to the Vasco database instead of Blackboard. So, and that uses Tin Can API instead of Storm. So I find that it is it's pretty good. The only problem is the data comes through, but there's no like grade book, there's no class, so it's just a giant like database. So if you want to know, you know, you got to kind of like be able to look at the database yourself. You're like, okay, here's the assignment, here's the list of the 50 students. You know, I can get an Excel out of it, but it's not nice and tidy like a Blackboard gradebook where they see their grade, it's automatic. You know, you'd have to pull that database and then put it in the Blackboard gradebook. So I mean, there's some big drawbacks to that too. Some other ideas I've had is just using a different way to catch the data in the Articulate. So like embedding a survey or a poll or something. So just avoiding Swarm altogether. And I, you know, to be honest, I haven't come up with a solution that really works. But I want to because Swarm is like, it's perfect except for that it skips. Sometimes you get the little purple clock. I mean, the person finished it. There wasn't a malfunction. The browser didn't freeze. It just didn't come through. So, and is that what you're talking about?
That's a big part of it. So other things are like very simple, like shit's not moving right. Like actions are not moving right, and you know, things like that. Or you know, when you have something off the screen and it's moving in, and sometimes it just stays there, it doesn't move back into the canvas. It's just the element outside the screen and never moves in. And that element's like a graph or something. I'm like, they need to see the graph, so I got to go in and I got to just like, okay, screw the action. I just put the graph on the thing. But I mean, having to do that with a lot of Articulates is really annoying. So that's just one.
I mean, something you might think about, especially since you're the primary one using it, you might want to think about getting them to get you a subscription to Articulate, which is like a cloud-based.
I've used it. I like it.
And we have it in we have like one license over in our building, so if you ever want to use it, we're trying to set up a lab, so you might be able to use it in that case, but practically,
That is great.
Yes, and to get you a license on your own.
So I got you guys a copy.
In that case,
a copy of the project.
To be honest, I feel like they're really focusing on 360.
Thank you.
So like
Actually,
those Articulate Studio licenses that we have,
I
I
do
don't know if they're
not
updating
option.
students.
There's
Our
option.
team as regularly.
I never
as they're updating. So 360 is getting all the cool stuff and all the browser updates real fast. 13, when you look at the last time 13 was updated to 13, it's like, I haven't looked lately, but I think it's been like 6 months. So those browsers have changed.
And
So that might be
you still
something you
have
want to
this
use too.
association with such a
Now,
mission.
you use that.
Yeah, it's very powerful,
You get like a lot more like, you get access to those templates. There's also that this thing called Rise. No, that's so
Yeah, especially for
yeah, it's like a WordPress style e-learning thing. Still does Swarm. So, but it's the content and it's already responsive, so that's really nice. And 360 also just has a lot more new features that they're looking at, but they're not giving it to the people who bought those storyline licenses. And you know, in the storyline 2, which we give all those licenses to, they've moved on to storyline 3 as well. So these features are getting pushed to storyline 3. As far as studio, they're still at 13. So I don't know what, I guess what I'm saying is, if you're going to be using Articulate a lot, you're probably going to have to go to the 360. But I mean, they're a lot more expensive, so you probably will do that. And it's yearly. The first year at least,
By those guys.
it's cheaper.
Yeah, because I really do think
built the.
as we
curriculum
become
of
more
where courses might be,
adept
and
at
then started dealing with
applying a lot
courses
of
against
these different software,
So
we need
I
to
made
figure
minor
out
changes,
our strategies for
just,
dealing with legacy
to
issues.
change some of
Yeah.
the verbatim, that's all. I did not
Because,
change
like you
any
and
of the
me,
stuff
we
that's set up,
won't be
either
able
I
to go
added
into
or changed the
every
verbatim.
every
That's
one
all
of
I
these
did.
broken
from your.
Because
modules
Yeah,
and try to
because then
figure
I
out
think
why
the way I
what's wrong
communicated
with
is
it.
much better.
Yeah.
Even just getting the
What-
zip
what-
file,
I'm
That's what
putting
I'm
it back
saying, like,
into
I did not-
Articulate
I did
and
not
pushing it
have to
out
commit
to the
anything.
newest version,
So
that
I
takes
see
time.
that.
No, I know.
Right,
Yeah.
so there's need to add
So,
anything.
That's what happens
Well,
with
the thing is, we
PA
can't.
every
change course
year.
description.
I did not
They-
change it,
and
but
they
I
do
was
that.
saying,
I was saying, those two things we
But-
can't.
That's the learning
See,
objectives
they
are
take all their articulates and repost because somehow the way the Blackboard kind of flips around every year, it breaks them all. Almost every single one. They all have to just republish everything. And I
Right,
asked
so I
them to
guess
do
where
it.
I'm going.
What
with
happens
this
is they
because
like
this
always have
goes back to
issues.
curriculum
So they have to find
course,
their
and
files
well,
or
where-
they can't
where
remember how to
the reason I'm
publish.
bringing this
Or they
up
can't remember how to
is we
upload
might find in
Blackboard.
our
Or they get the
discussion
settings wrong, so it doesn't work right.
where I
So,
really
You
didn't
gotta
have
permission
time
settings
to
applies.
yeah, so yeah,
really
that's
look at the
been
theory
happening
behind
with
it. Because
PTA.
theory,
Um,
it's
So
a
do you
different
guys
method of-
post, do you guys
No, I
put,
didn't. I can
those
read it.
articulates
Okay.
inside of Blackboard, the
Because
content
one
collection,
thing
or you
is I
have like
did
an
make a
outside
single copy
repository
such
for
a
those?
thing.
No,
This is the sixth semester curriculum.
we like
This
publish
is the
them.
only place
some
that is the
articulate
foundation for
as,
theory.
LMS.
Everywhere else is
Oh,
high
okay.
development.
So
And so
if
having
you
this
do
all
that in
this-
Articulate, it just says LMS, and you have the specific settings for it to work in Blackboard. And I can send this to
So
you.
the thing is,
If
the
these
way
form
I look at
1.2,
it is,
and you have to change the
is we can
setting
look at
to,
it,
you have
the
like
way to
four
look at
options,
it
like passing
is
speed, pass
one
blah,
unit
blah. The one you have to
specific
choose is
to
pass
theory,
fail.
one unit
That's what makes it
specific
work
to
better
evidence-based practice,
in Blackboard.
one unit for
like little clocks
integration
on that.
of theory and evidence-based
So that's
practice
important.
together, so they
But anyways, you end up with a zip.
that's one.
When you upload that zip into Blackboard as a
Other
smart
thing
package.
is
So that's, you can write on that.